Hi everybody. So today I was going to do a quick little study on the largest electronically traded funds, or ETFs. And so I just did a bunch of homework here, and found out that there isn't a whole lot of information actually. There's very few websites that really, in some senses, control what's going on. And here you have kind of the graph. I got this here from ETFTB, this website over here. Let's see, I can transition here to this. But basically it came from this website. It's pretty good. When I first started thinking about ETFs, I went to this website, and unfortunately, this is about it. There's other websites like Morningstar, and they had this little graph here that was pretty helpful. But in general, there's a lot of like paid kind of things, and you have to go through a lot of hoops just trying to find some of this data. But the reason I like this graph is it included the volume and the total amount of investment in each of these. So, and I believe these numbers are a little bit weird, and it's kind of confusing. It doesn't even say if this is in millions or if it is in thousands or what. So so basically what I did was grab the data and kind of recheck it myself to see what was going on. So this is the original data here with the numbers from ETFDB, and then I kind of cross-checked that with Google. So I use this code here to say Google Finance, and then whatever the ticker symbol is, and actually it didn't show the ticker. And then just find the total market cap, or and in this line I did average volume. So some of them didn't really show up for average volume, and kind of wanted to compare. So some of these numbers are just drastically different, right? So you see this average volume does not match with that average volume. And then I got the price. So the prices usually showed up when I got the price from Google here. So you can see, just hand in the price there. And there is a whole kind of API for that if you wanted to look at this here, and you can do pretty much whatever you want. If you want to get the price, volume, or market cap like I was getting, or the average volume. So basically once you get that, you get this. So it looks like these numbers check out for the most part, but you can see I actually even checked this also with Yahoo to kind of see with these net assets. So you can see here that as my light goes out, yeah, so basically as these net assets, so it says $277 billion. And this here says $333 billion. So there are some differences in the numbers by quite a lot. So one thing that I was very scared about is, so how are these prices calculated? And there's this thing called NAV, which is the net asset value. And if you look that up, basically it is a calculated number, and it says, rather than its price, the net asset value is calculated after adding the market value of all securities and then dividing it by the number of shares. So if you think about that, total market value divided by shares, right? So that is the ticker price. So basically that means anytime you put an investment into here, they put it into their investments, which is their holdings. And we'll get into that a little bit later. So the holdings, just click on this really quick to see. So you can see, so this is the S&P 500. So this is essentially should track the S&P 500. And I've compared that just to make sure that it does track the S&P 500, and it does. And then here are their top holdings. So if you go through these and you open up each one of these, you can see that Apple is the largest company in the S&P 500, then Microsoft, then. So it's basically not a very complex investment here. It's just basically picking the top companies in the S&P 500. So with that said, that right there we just looked at is the number one in the world. Okay, so if you take that back to this graph here, you can kind of see, so that first one was this guy right here. So that basically, this number is in thousands, put that up here. But basically this is thousands, and yeah, so that'd be 100,000. This is millions, and then this is billions. So we're not at the trillion mark per fund, but it's a third of that. So this one here, this is a linear graph. I also graphed this on a log graph, so you can kind of see some of these lower ones a little bit more in detail. But on this, you can kind of see that these top two funds, being this a Vanguard fund, and even that I would question, because some of the numbers I've been seeing is the Invesco has a higher volume trades. So I'm not sure if I would trust the numbers. Kind of, you need to be careful. So, but for the most part, I think they're probably correct. So basically these top two and even top three, which, and actually this would be top four, right? So what do we got here? Maybe Invesco. So if you go back here, you can kind of see that there's kind of this initial group here is basically the largest in the world, and then there's kind of a pretty big drop off. So what I wanted to do is kind of look at those, and you can kind of see, and this is by total dollars. We're going to look at volume here in a second, but you can see that these other ones are kind of slivers of this one, right? So this is the SPDR, and they have their own website, and they're kind of we can look into the details about them in a second. So there's iShares, they're one here, and there's a lot of other iShares as well. So it would be nice to kind of compare these as individual companies and what they're trying to do. So I did try to do that, compared to like total assets for each one of these. But and then you can see Vanguard kind of theirs, and then Invesco, QQQ. So actually these are kind of big, and then it kind of trails off here, and you can see it trails off fairly uniformly. It looks, at least on this one, it seems to trail off, but you know, you can kind of see and look at each one of these. So I kind of just wanted to go into these carefully with you. So basically, here's some of the names. So if you wanted to, I'm going to try to post this with this research, so you can kind of look at the direct links and compare them. Now, on the volume side, volume is slightly different, right? So here we start to see QQQ showing up, and I'm going to go to this graph here. So this is just a log graph again. So you can see that the volume for a lot of them is about I think this is just individual trades, so this would be in millions, right? So, and let's just check that really quick. So the volume on this summary chart, let's just look at average volume. So, yeah, so this is average volume of this one is about 76 million trades, and that's per day. And you can kind of see along this graph, and we'll even graph that in full screen in a moment, but so you can see that this first one here, 70, so that's at 78 million, and this shows 70, the other one shows 76, so slightly different. And unfortunately, you can also do these on Google and see, but it doesn't really always give you all the details that Yahoo Finance does, which is kind of odd. It used to give you more. But this is the same one, so you can see that 369 and 369. So, and that just is the total, essentially the total assets, right? So why these numbers don't match up, I'm not quite sure on that. This is maybe calculated value of some sort, but so basically you can see that these top three are in their own group, and then there's kind of like this middle group. Now this is on a log scale, so you can kind of say that each of these sections are similar in line, so they're kind of the same kind of branch of investment in terms of interest. So you know, these prices are also important for each of these securities. So what I did is I just grabbed all the prices to kind of compare, and then took an average. So if you go to all of these, and right down here, you can see the average is $120. So for a typical ETF, that's typically what you are spending to get involved. But at these very top, you can see that it's not quite the case. So you can see that for these most largest ones, with the exception of this Vanguard one and another Vanguard here. So these are all $300, and then or around $200, or even almost close to $400, right? So, but many of the other ones are lower. So there's kind of definitely some differences here. So it looks like it's not even. We might be able to do a histogram. Let me just graph that in a second. Histogram of the price. Okay, so here's basically the scatter plot of this, and actually I want to just add a, see if I can add a trend line here so you can kind of see what's going on with that. So let me, hold on. Okay, sorry about that. So here's kind of the trend lines. You can kind of see this is the average for all of the ETFs. But you can kind of see there's kind of a cluster in here just above. So the price kind of at the lower end actually being slightly higher than this average trend line. So in general, you might actually want to choose something in the middle here, just because these look to be a little bit higher price for the size. So if you're interested in owning a lot, but the other side of this is that you know, when you have a lot of assets, it's hard to move those assets in and out of the security. So, but then again, these top ones are just trailing of the funds. So maybe some of these other ones are a little bit more sophisticated. So there's certain advantages of smaller ones. And then here's kind of just a regular scatter plot of that. And you can kind of see this $100 range. So I think the average was a little bit above that, 120. So, but this is basically looking at both the market cap and the price. So there are a few of them that are kind of lower here, almost around, say, you know, $15, $20. And then some others that are quite a bit above. And anyway, but that gives you an idea for this. So you're probably gonna laugh, but this is kind of a lot of different of the ones that are the highest volume. So what I put here is the SPY, which is the basically trails the S&P 500, and compared that to kind of these sub versions. So at the top here you have QQQ, which is kind of a heavily technology centric one. And then you have IAU. So let's just look up IAU really quick so you can see IAU. So that is a gold one. And then this pink one is XLK. And I think XLK. And that's a technology centric spider. And then you have these other ones. So EEM, I think, is an emerging markets one. So you can kind of see the emerging markets one doing a little bit better than the SPY, but in recent times, maybe not so much. But with all these so high, you wonder, well, that's pretty high. That's not necessarily a good time to buy. It's actually a good time to sell. So, and I even added this other one that my friend told me about, which is just a purely semiconductor. And when you see this, you're gonna laugh. So basically, it just takes everything off the scale here. So you see this one just kind of really jumping up, and you can see really dropping. So this is a 3 times leverage ETF, and man, that was a big drop here, and then a big increase. So not sure what to say. So at this point, you know, you may want to think about selling actually, but anyway, but it is interesting to compare these other ones on here just to see. And at the bottom here, these are kind of the price volume trends. So this is just for the SPY, so you can see basically, you know, some actually, some kinds of, in general, not necessarily good, but dropping here. So I'm not sure. We probably have to change this to 1 year time frame. Hopefully that would change this a little bit, but you can see this major drop and kind of not quite a recovery. So I'm not sure. To me, this looks a little bit strange, just seeing overall price and volume dropping, and the unbalance. So that would mean the price would be going down or some kind of problems in general. So not sure if that's correct or not, but you can kind of graph take off. If you take this one off, you can kind of start to see, and it's giving me a lot of problems here. But you can basically start to see what's going on with each of these, and it's really kind of slow right now. Sorry about that. So I found this graph on Morningstar, and pretty good graph showing kind of the sections of how much each of these groups are controlling in terms of the ETF. So it looks like originally around 1998, State Street had most of the ETF market, and very quickly dropped to you can see iShares even had almost nothing there for a little while, and then kind of pulled ahead. So, and even Vanguard kind of showing up around 2002 with these ETFs, right? So, and then there's a bunch of others. So you kind of wonder what happened right in here. And then around 2006, you can see the market kind of opening up for many different other ones. So I'm kind of interested actually in non-mainstream ETFs, but certainly it's interesting to see the bigger ones. So, and I'm not even sure if these are correct, and but it's nice to see that they have the little details in here. So they could probably track this per day and just see the market size and kind of estimate what that is. So certainly I'm kind of surprised at how much are in iShares and certainly State Street here. So couldn't really find in the data that I found here. So this is the list, right? So kind of see this is SPDR. And iShares and so on. So I think some of these are probably controlled by these. There's kind of different companies here involved. So basically, what I did is I went in and kind of looked at each one of these companies. So if you give me a second here, we can kind of do this. So basically. These are the SPDR. So these are the number one in the world in terms of total amounts of value. This has about $300 billion invested. And to do the math here, so, you know, there's basically about 300 million people in the United States. And kind of compare that to the 300 billion. So a lot of people have invested in this particular spider. And I think it's kind of strange because I was trying to find numbers to compare like mutual funds to ETFs, and I did find that. I can show you in a second. So just to conclude here, there's a lot more to study. I was going to kind of go into each of these in detail in another follow-up video, but in general, I'd say, you know, I was pretty surprised at some of the numbers when I kind of went through and checked out some things. So essentially, we're talking about $3 to $4 trillion was my estimate. So I basically took all those mutual funds that were listed as the top mutual funds and then kind of guessed at what the additional value of, excuse me, not mutual funds, but ETFs, and took that. So, and kind of estimated what the total value would be if I had the full picture of everything. So it's basically 3 to 4 trillion. And of that, to kind of put this into perspective, so the entire stock market is worth about 34 trillion, incidentally. And if you compare that to the housing market numbers are fairly easy to get. You just estimate the average value of the house, which is about 300,000, and then you multiply that times 137 million houses, and you get about $40 trillion. So the interesting thing about that number, so if you compare these three numbers, so you have the stock market, 34 trillion, the housing market, 40 trillion, and then ETFs being around 4 trillion. You can kind of start to estimate some other details. I saw some mutual fund numbers, and I'm not even sure if they're correct or not, but you can kind of segment out the market. So I guess from an overall perspective, the other thing I was thinking about is just PE ratios. So when you think about the average PE being about 12 over, you know, a few, like basically 100 years, and then you look at today's PE ratios in the 20s or 30s, and then you kind of compare that to the housing market and the value of the stocks, you can say that everything might be inflated by a factor of 3. So that is kind of a problem when you think about it, right? So it's not just the stock market, but it's also the housing market, right? So if you take the house's value, you could say, well, man, how much money have I really made on this house? And it's probably increased quite a lot. And is that just inflation, or what's all going on? So when you look at the PE ratio, you can kind of also estimate. So like, are we estimating for, because with supply and demand, are we estimating for like a future population of Earth, or even a future population in the United States? So those PE ratios, because if you multiply it times 3 times the population, then you can start to get a PE ratio that makes sense, right, in terms of historical levels, right? So in some ways, what we've seen in the recent years of the stock market, or at least the last past year, is that the prices are usually estimates of what the future values might be. So they're not the current value, but the future value. So in general, people are estimating about 3 times out, which seems like quite a lot, but that's what is happening right now. So, but in general, for ETFs here, we have quite a lot of money, and we basically broke them down into the various sizes here. I'm going to try to go into the details. There was a lot of really interesting details inside of each of these. For example, just like who all is investing. So like what you could do is take the individual companies that they're investing in, and then look at kind of like who the investment companies are that are primarily buying the largest stocks, like Apple, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and kind of seeing what the breakdown is in terms of institutions. So in general, I hate to say this number, but it's looking like of the money in the U.S. economy, in the stock market, approximately only $4 trillion is left over from the after you subtract institutional investment. So there's basically a small percentage that's actually being traded by people directly in particular stocks. So these ETFs and mutual funds are huge in terms of overall percentage. Let me know if you got some questions or some ideas, or just some cool things that you think I maybe missed that I should look into in more detail. Certainly there's just a lot of these here. I did go and kind of open up and study each one of these companies, but I wanted to kind of leave that to a separate thing, because some of these are getting kind of long discussions. But I am interested in working with others, so let me know like what you think and what ideas you have. Hope you're doing good. Ciao.